Modern education is known for the sit and get and jam and cram methods. That's the way most of us were educated. I certainly remember sitting in class, making notes, trying to get all the information to jam it and cram it into my head and flood the information back onto a test to prove that I had learned something, only to forget most of it a few days later. But what does it look like to actually teach a student to learn and think well? It's especially important in a world where AI continues to do the thinking for so many people. Our guest today, Charley Dewberry, has spent much of his life wrestling with these questions. And as a scientist, a philosopher, and an educator, he helps bring a perspective that we really need to hear today on how human beings actually learn, and ultimately why seeking the truth in our learning is able to shape us not only to learn well, but to be fully human. Join us for this episode of Basecamp Live.
Mountains. We all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to Basecamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Welcome to another episode of Basecamp Live. Davies Owens here with you. Big shout out to a number of folks here as we get started, to John DePoe and his team at Kingdom Preparatory Academy in Lubbock, Texas. I just got back from Lubbock a couple days ago, had the joy of being there with John at his invitation to have a chance to teach and be with his teachers as well as parents for several sessions. What an extraordinary community, John. Thank you for the enthusiasm you have for classical education and collaborative education and the great work that you guys are doing there in Lubbock. Big shout out as well to Jason Ross, president at Providence Classical Christian Academy in Rogers, Arizona, and to Heather Baker, head of school at Haw River Christian Academy in Pittsburgh, North Carolina. Thank all of you for being a part of the Basecamp Live and Zipcast communities. Charley Dewberry is an academic dean and tutor at Gutenberg College, but he also is a research scientist, diving in and counting salmon throughout the Pacific Northwest. He's got tremendous amount of experience in the great outdoors and witnessing God's creation and tying it back into education. He's written a number of books, Saving Science, a critique of science and its role in salmon recovery, as well as a second book, Intelligent Discourse, exposing the fallacious standoff between evolution and intelligent design. Charley is married to Susie Dewberry, and they have two sons. They live in Florence, Oregon. I am so grateful for this opportunity to talk with someone who has so much experience in the classroom and has seen the many changes that so many of us have had. Before we jump in, a quick shout out and thank you to this episode's sponsors, our friend Robert Littlejohn and Chuck Evans with their book, Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents, which is an excellent overview of classical education. Our friends at the Wise Phone organization, where you can use technology without it having all of the addictive aspects to it, as well as Life Architects, Tammy Peterson's group that does fantastic aptitude and vocational discipleship training, the Herzog Foundation, and of course, our own Zipcast. You hear me talk about Zipcast all the time. We have schools around the country on the platform. By the way, if you looked into Zipcast a few years ago, I can tell you it's a very, very different product. One thing that's really unique this year is that schools can go in and pick from over 1,000 different segments in which we have put together content on classical education and parenting, which is a big help, along with your local stories and updates for each week. Learn more at zipcast.media. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Charley Dewberry. Well, Charley Dewberry, welcome to Basecamp Live.
Yeah, thank you, Davies.
It's good to have you on. You have such a fascinating story. I had the privilege a few years ago being there on the campus at Gutenberg College and being a part of the symposium that was happening there. Amazing work that happens. You've been a part of that community now for how long?
Well, since about 1980. And actually I'm one of the founders of Gutenberg.
Yeah. And share a little bit of your story for folks that don't know you, because not only you're a founder of Gutenberg, you've also, you've got many hats you wear. You're a scientist, a philosopher, an educator, theologian, and you have quite a knack, I understand, for researching salmon as well. Share a little bit of your story.
Well, I grew up in Michigan, and I was always interested in salmon restoration. In Michigan, historically, when they logged it and burned it in the 19th century, the only native salmonid was called the Michigan grayling, and it went extinct. And from the time I was 7 or 8 years old, I was fascinated by that fish and the idea of restoring one of those river systems to get them back. So all the way through my education, I was a science geek. and did my bachelor's at Michigan State, my master's in stream ecology at Michigan State. And on the way to Oregon to start a PhD in stream ecology, as you might expect, I picked up a couple books. And one of the books I started to read coming across the country was a philosophy book. Never read one in my life. First thing I realized was I couldn't read it, but I could read it well enough to know the author had destroyed everything I'd been taught about science and how to do it. Well, what am I going to do with that? I realized that I'd really messed up my education because the question, what is science? That's not a science question. That's a philosophy question. And I had absolutely no background or tools to deal with it. That's what changed the trajectory of my life. And out of that, I ended up getting a PhD in philosophy of science. And I also became a Christian out of this experience, bumping up against a tutor at Gutenberg the previous iteration of Gutenberg. And he was, he had a PhD from Stanford in physics, and then he taught the Bible. And he basically said, you're right about science, but I just need to tell you only a Christian could believe that. So anyway, I became a Christian, took their 3-year Greek and Hebrew exegesis program, and out of that became one of the founders of Gutenberg. And also my wife, Susie, and I have 2 boys, both who went through Gutenberg. Mm-hmm. And I'm still here at Gutenberg 30 years later.
You're still... So, Charley, I want to just put a spotlight on that one. You were talking about just sort of that really pivotal moment for you where you were initially reading philosophy and then you kind of butted heads right into Christian faith and theology, and it just was sort of everything changed for you. What precisely was that moment, or what was the thing you ran into that really awakened you?
Well, it was really the experience reading that book, because the tutor that I talked to said that for him, that was the most important book to understand science, but it was also the most important book to understand how to interpret the Bible. Because the question it's raising is, what do we know and how do we know it? And it's proposing a whole new framework of how we know. And that's fundamental if you're going to think about education. I mean, you need to think about how is it that we actually learn.
Which is really the topic I want to jump into, as much as I'm curious to ask you more things about the salmon right now, but we can maybe come back to that at the end. But, we live in this moment where most of those who are listening, myself included, did not grow up with any classical Christian framework. Even if you were a follower of Christ, the idea of education was often about absorbing information and knowledge to then pass your way through tests to get onto college. So the idea of education at core is really teaching us how to think and not just find answers. What do you see? I mean, I know this is near and dear to your own understanding, but what do you see, first of all, just sort of the current problems with American education that maybe we're not fully aware of how significant the problem is and not teaching us how to think?
Well, I think you touched on it just a moment ago, that we primarily see education as gaining information and gaining information to get a good job. So it's about specialized job education. What are the pieces of information I need to get that job? And behind that, it's framed really on an industrial model. It's an assembly line where everybody is expected to go through a step at a particular point in time. And part of this new view of how we know is that's not really true. And being a tutor at Gutenberg now has shown me that different people think very differently. And somehow we have to connect the dots enough that we can actually communicate with each other and figure out how to gain a larger, more broad worldview. And for us, the real key is paying attention to the skills rather than learning information. Education is fundamentally about skills. It's an art. All arts are based on skills, and we've not paid close attention to what it means to work on the skills. So anyway, I think that's, from my perspective, the shift that needs to be made to think about education.
And we're going to unpack that a bit. I know you've written and have taught extensively on just teaching students actually how to just read. I mean, these things that we think of reading and it's sort of one-dimensional. Can you put the letters together and make sense of it? But I know at Gutenberg, freshmen go through a fairly rigorous skill training that we can talk about. But what's interesting in what you're describing, Charley, is that, you know, when you say education is about training skills, it almost seems like you're advocating for kind of vocational training or something. That's not what you're talking about, because that is the downfall or the shortcoming of sort of modern education, is it stops at vocational training. But there is a skill. So unpack that a bit more, because there is something significant here you're talking.
Sure. I'm talking about the skills of being human. So let's start with this. Let's start with this. Let's just start with perception. Say, for example, we're in Yellowstone National Park on a summer afternoon, and we watch one of those massive Rocky Mountain thunderstorms come over the ridge, and it just lights up the sky. And in the midst of that, I say to you, a group of people, and I've actually had this happen, you know, lightning can go from the ground to the air. And people never realized that. They had never seen it. But as soon as I proposed that, some saw lightning go from the ground to the air for the first time in their lives. So the first thing is we see what we expect to see. And when it comes to reading, for instance, the Bible, we all know what it says. So when we start reading, we know what it says. So the fundamental skill of not just perception of how we see is we need to recognize that that's how we're built. We see what we're expecting to see. And we have to be open. We have to be humble enough to realize, maybe there's a different way we can experience this, or a different way we can interpret this. That's fundamentally one of the basic skills, I would argue, of being human. Because if we don't have that skill, we aren't going to learn anything, because we're stuck in the view we have.
Which, what I hear you saying is especially apropos to this moment, because it's like you hear this term confirmation bias all the time, or echo chambers, where people are only surrounding themselves by the social media or the AI or the tech that sort of builds algorithms that echo what they already think. And that's so dangerous, because we don't have that broader understanding perspective. Speak a little bit more on this, because it seems even more relevant maybe in the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I would argue one of the basic fundamental skills of being a human is to learn to communicate with another human being, and we all differ. So we all have differences. I mean, they may be relatively small, but they could be very large. The point is, we have to be open to try to understand the world through their eyes, through their mind. When we talk to another person, we have to try to get into their heads and see it from their perspective. If we're not willing to do that, then we're not communicating. And I would argue we're not. Communication is a fundamental human skill, and it's a fundamental human need. And that's what opens the possibility to becoming a skilled communicator, is knowing who the person is you're trying to communicate with. And you have to be willing to do that and work at it.
Yeah. And again, what I'm hearing that is so fascinating and in some ways so obvious, but it's something that we all, I think, can skim over the significance of it, is there are skills with literally everything. There's a skill of knowing how to communicate, as you're talking about. There's a skill of knowing how to read. And if you think you've got it mastered just because you think you can talk and someone can hear you, you're missing the depth of the importance of really learning to think and communicate deeply. So let's take a quick break. I want to come back because I really love to have you unpack, if you were with a group of students and you're trying to train them in these skills, what are some of the processes and conversations that you're having with them to both awaken them to the opportunity, and then really, how do you train those skills? Those are something that's obviously, it's not a simple process, but it's something you can maybe guide us in. So let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Hi there, classical Christian parents, students, and teachers. This is Robert Littlejohn, co-author with Charles Evans of Wisdom and Eloquence, a Christian paradigm for classical learning, published by Crossway Books. We want you to know about our new book with well-known family counselor Keith McCurdy, published by Classical Academic Press. The book is titled Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents: How Classical Christian Education Can Transform Your Children, Your Family, and the World. We have written this shorter, parent-focused book specifically as an admissions and parent education resource for schools and families. We are excited to be proud sponsors of Sipcast and Basecamp Live, and we hope you are enjoying these two great resources for classical learning as much as we are. And we would invite you to visit our website, wisdomandeloquence.org, to explore the various services offered by the authors of Wisdom and Eloquence for Parents, and to let us know how we can best serve you. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Today's episode of Basecamp Live is brought to you by my friend Chris Casper, who you heard on a recent episode. His invention, the Wise Phone, is a much-needed third way, providing a solution from the dangers of a smartphone on the one hand and the limited capacities of an old-school flip phone on the other. His simple, distraction-free phone design for families who want technology to serve their real lives and give us and our older children a way to do basic essentials like calling or texting or maps without the web browser and the social media and the endless apps that can pull them and us into the addictive, time-wasting aspects of a smartphone. I personally have a Wise Phone, and I can vouch that it is an excellent solution and an appropriate way to use technology that supports virtue and focus and healthy habits. Check out the link in our show notes and on our Basecamp Live website partners page, where Chris is offering Basecamp Live listeners a discount. Charley, before the break, you were describing this amazing scene of training people on understanding how lightning works, and that it's actually coming up from the ground, which is, I don't think I'll think of lightning in the same way now after this conversation. But I want you to unpack a little bit more. The reality is that two people can see the same thing and still come away with a very different interpretation of what they saw, because humans process things differently. Help us understand that.
Well, that was one of the major points from the book I mentioned, and the book is Personal Knowledge by Michael Polanyi. Polanyi makes the point there's no such thing as an objective fact. So think about our lightning example, is you see what you expect to see. Now, there is an objective reality, but the only way you make contact with it is to have the right lens. In other words, you got to have the right view in your mind to see it. And so that's why it's important to actually be able to dialogue between people who disagree on things. Now, the case example at Gutenberg that we spend a year on is Copernicus and Ptolemy. Is the solar system Earth-centered? Are we in the center of the universe and everything goes around us? Or is the sun in the center and we're moving? Well, imagine Ptolemy and Copernicus standing in a loft watching the sun come up. They see different things. And in fact, I think everyone who does the experiment is going to see what Ptolemy sees. What do we see? We're standing on a stationary planet and the sun is moving. Ptolemy is right.
Right.
If Observation and experience are the fundamental ground by which we know how the solar system works. Well, imagine the conversation between the two. The sun moves. No, it doesn't. The earth turns. What's the fact? The point is, it depends on your theory. And the question is, which theory's right? It's a long conversation about which explanation fits all the facts the best. And what I would say, it's just like being on a jury in a court case. You're presented two narratives of a set of facts, and your job is you have to decide which one makes the most sense. In philosophy, we call this abduction. That's a type of inference, like induction and deduction. But it's really how we know almost everything, is we're taking the bits of information and putting them together in the best narrative. That's the secret to education. You can't learn this by lecture. Lectures are a very, very poor form of education to begin to learn this skill of abduction.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, I think this is, it's an interesting way for us to frame the problem, because especially as Christ followers, I think there is a tendency to just say, well, true truth, capital T, everybody knows this is the case. And yet we live through our individual identity, through our own observation and experience. And we're in a cultural moment where it's all about experience. It's all about what does it mean for you. So there is a huge gap, to your point, between what one may be seeing as the sun is coming up and what is actually going on. So it sounds like then the part of it is you got to meet people where they are, acknowledge that's how they're seeing it, and then try to guide them towards really finding what are true truth answers. The sun actually does, we're not the center of the universe. I mean, so how do we move people past their own biases and their own observations to true truth? That seems like the really hard part.
Yes. But yet I would say the process I'm describing is the one we use every day to live our entire lives. This process of we're going through life and experiencing things, and our experiences as we go along for most of the time just fit with the view we already have, our lens. But every once in a while, we'll bump up against something that doesn't fit, and then we have to figure it out. Of how do we make sense of this piece of information? How do we make it coherent with what we do know? Now, in reading, the key difference between just our life experience, the key difference is we have to ask the question, what did the author mean when the author wrote it? And again, this is interesting because authorial intent has been really challenged since the 1960s. And so most education is not focused on authorial intent. And I would say that's absolutely central to understanding the Bible, is what did the author mean when he wrote it? And that's what we're after.
Right. And again, it's so opposite the way the modern culture is very much, there is no authority but oneself. And I remember when I was at Duke, Stanley Fish was known for kind of leading the deconstructionist movement, where it didn't really matter what the author intended. It's what you decide it means for you. And that's where most education is today. You take a great books program at, many secular universities, there is no anchor point to anything. And so help us understand. So, the idea of how do you teach a student to think is you've got to have them come to terms with, as you describe, bumping into things that don't always fit maybe what you're comfortable with, and then having the courage to pursue it. So again, how do you press through in those moments?
Well, at Gutenberg, that's what the great books are for. That's what reading these difficult books is about, because most of the great books are written from a perspective very different from ours. And so in order to even understand the author, we have to work hard at this skill of getting in the author's head. What did the author think about the world, and what was the author's lens? How did they see all these pieces fitting together? And it may be very different from ours. Well, first we have to recognize the difference. We have to really get good at getting in their heads. And then comes the part about asking ourselves, well, wait a minute, is their lens better here than ours? And if so, that's a moment we can learn something. But it takes first humility and patience. I mean, we all know this in conversation. If you're trying to have a conversation with somebody, but it's very clear they're not open to any possibility of changing their mind about it at all, what's the point of the conversation? It's not going to go anywhere. There's not going to be a change of real experience and a discourse that's going to make a difference. So that's really the key.
Well, and that idea of humility, I mean, one has to really be willing to submit yourself, move yourself as the center of everything aside and say, I'm here to learn, which means I may need to make a change. So that you're right, education at core has to be a humbling activity. And the idea of, you were talking before about just the ineffectiveness of a lecture where it's just a single person just spewing, and spewing is probably too strong. There are places, very positive lectures, but it can become just a fire hosing of information and not really what you're describing in this article, Skilled Reading and the Art of Interpretation, which we'll put in the show notes, because you really unpack this idea of teaching the skill of reading and interpretation. So continue on with that. And I'd love to know, describe that, especially as you bring students into Gutenberg in that freshman year. There is literally a kind of rewiring process you take them through.
Yeah. Well, first, actually, before we do that, let me stop, because education is a process. In other words, you can't do what I'm talking about with a first grader. So,
right.
So first we have to realize how there is development that takes place, and there are stages. And I just want to comment on those. The first stage is the student needs to just gain experience. They do need to just learn a bunch of stuff. And in my mind, it's driven in large part by what they're interested in. As long as they have the motivation to discover and pursue things, by all means. The second level really then is, but there is a set of information that everybody does need to come up with. So sort of at the middle stage, we do need to make sure that all of the information in a broad area gets brought in. And at the second stage, you begin to understand that there are differences. What I'm talking about at Gutenberg is, so I would consider that second stage through high school, is they don't have the mental capacity yet. They don't have the mental development to really understand complex issues and make judgments about them. That comes at the college level. And so it's at that level that now I'm focusing on here. So it's not that you can take this and apply it to any age child. It's really focused on, they've just entered that stage where they have the capacity now to develop this skill of judgment about complex issues. So I do want to say that, because you can't just,
it's an excellent point.
Start out with first grade.
Right. Well, and it sounds very much like it's paralleling the Latin trivium. That's sort of the frame that sits around at least the K-12 journey, where you are walking them in those early stages through very basic skills of learning the grammar, that you have to be the early building blocks, and you hit the logic. And then rhetoric's really when you're trying to move in that direction of let's learn how to speak and read and engage well. And then I think what I love about what I call 13th grade and beyond college is now you're really positioned well in the right environment to hone those skills, which is what you guys do so well.
Yes, and it's those homeschool parents and those CC parents that essentially develop those skills as part of their educational background. Yeah, those homeschooled students in CC and other groups, they come as prepared as anybody to do the Gutenberg project. So they're set up to do it.
Well, let's take another break, and I want to come back just in the final segment, just get some practical wisdom from you. There's part of me that wishes I was 18 and I could do this all over again. I think this would be a fascinating experience. And I've had the joy of being in some sessions there at Gutenberg, and just the level of thoughtful conversation is so soul enriching in a world of such superficiality, of really thoughtful conversation and thinking. But how do we do that if we're not able to be there freshman year at Gutenberg in our homes, and even as we prepare students to head into college? Let's take a break and we'll come back and continue the conversation.
The road to graduation begins early and takes many paths. And without a skilled guide, it can feel overwhelming. The career coaches at Life Architects empower students to discover who God created them to be through our unique vocational discipleship model. You can bring this graduation game changer to your school through one-on-one student coaching, on-campus workshops, or even faculty training. Visit lifearchitectscoaching.com today.
During this short break, I have a special invitation to all school leaders, administrators, and teachers. I want you to imagine for a moment stepping away from your everyday routine at school and diving deep into the rich foundations of Christian education, surrounded by world-class scholars, seasoned classroom teachers, and administrative experts with years of experience running schools with a lot of wisdom to share. That's exactly what the Herzog Foundation's Institute is offering. I've had the joy of serving as a training coach for the last few years, leading their 2.5-day training on spiritual formation and another one on parent engagement. They offer close to 50 unique training events ranging from board governance to marketing to classroom best practices. They even offer a training on how to teach the great books. And the best part of all, well, thanks to the generosity of the Herzog Foundation, these training events, including lodging, are completely free for Christian educators. Institutes are located around the country in beautiful locations, including at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and the Reagan Library in Santa Barbara. Don't miss this incredible opportunity. Check out the details at theherzogfoundation.com. Well, Charlie, in the few minutes we have left, there are many folks listening that are parents of K-12 and they're educators. I think we agree that we're in a prime opportunity to really bring the next generation into an awareness, not just of facts and information, but really deeply knowing the skill of how to think well. So how are just some recommendations you've got for those of us walking next to K-12 students to begin to put those skills into them that will prepare them to think well?
First and foremost is model it. Continue your own education. Show them that it's really of value to you. I'm still learning, and that's one of the things about being at Gutenberg. I learn stuff all the time from the students. They really help me on my journey, and that's incredibly important, and I think the foundation of the whole thing. And I would also say, especially early, is the main thing is just encourage discovery. People argue science is a different thing, STEM is a different thing. One of the implications of what I'm saying is science is high art. It's no different than anything else. It is not a method, a mechanical method of testing. It's creative discovery. That's what science should be. So by all means, let the students experience nature, decide what they're interested in, let them pursue it. And as I say, that's the fundamental thing, is just pursue creativity and discovery. And, the pieces that they're not picking up immediately, they can be picked up in the middle parts of their education and later. But the most important thing is just work on that discovery and creativity and being open to listening to differing opinions on how things work or what's of value.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things I would begin with.
Those are good. I mean, I think modeling, we often talk as if the focus is just on the students, but us as adults, we live in the same world, and we're, I think, equally vulnerable to our own confirmation biases and not asking deep questions and assuming that information is the same thing as knowledge. It's not. So those are good reminders for all of us. When you teach, maybe just, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, as a piece of this is, with every conversation, view it as an opportunity to learn from the other person, especially if they differ from you. You don't learn much of anything talking to people that you agree with and are like you. You really only learn from people who have a quite different view. And so that's hard for us to develop that skill of being open to that, of being open to being challenged. But I would say we do it in everyday conversation. It's fundamentally not different from doing it with an author of a book that you may agree or disagree with. The skills are fundamentally similar. So I would say that just that basic human life experience and interaction is fundamentally what I'm talking about of the life skill set. And so becoming a better reader is not any different than becoming a better listener to another person.
It's a really good reminder, and I think especially hard today because people are moving so quickly, and there's a bit of such a polarization that when we encounter someone who doesn't seem to think the way we think, it can become very bombastic very quickly. I mean, you see this in our sort of cancel culture, where if you don't even think about taking the time to hear another person's perspective. And just to make a point, going back to something you said, you're not just advocating like diversity conversation, like let's all just, hear each other's story and that's the end of it. The whole point is to actually hear the stories to then move us to curiosity to ultimately take us to truth. So that journey is messy and slow at times, but it's so critical if we're really going to teach or help move people towards ultimately being followers of truth. And so that's back to your example of the sun's orbit.
Well, and also in this day and age, technology makes this more and more difficult to do. Every new technology, in a sense, takes us away from human discourse and communication. We need to be able to sit down over a cup of coffee or whatever without time constraints and whatever, and have these conversations. But technology forces us into sound bites and things that move us away from developing and using these skills.
Right. That's so true. And I think, again, the ultimate is if you can sit on campus and have life carved out and protected as a student to then engage in hour or 2 hour long, deep, thoughtful conversations. We know that's important in a person's journey to have those moments to create an understanding and appetite for it. It is certainly hard when we're, in the midst of raising children and juggling jobs and driving minivans all over the place just to get from point A to point B. How is just a final word of encouragement for people that are kind of in that season where they're on the go? How can they find even smaller moments just to build those skills of deep thinking?
Well, I think you just have to consciously create them and just see how important they are. And, just at times, set the phones and computers and all of that, set it aside. And I'm fortunate. I live outside cell range, and we have a satellite that we use for email, and that's basically it. So my wife and I feel quite fortunate to be able to live in a situation where it's really even not much of an option for us to be on the computer or on the phone.
It sounds absolutely attractive. I think more and more people today are moving. Maybe you've heard this idea of just sort of moving towards the analog. There's a lot of fatigue in the digital existence. And so you're a pioneer, or you've rediscovered what I think a lot of people are coming back to. So living kind of off the grid a bit to have time to re-engage as a human. It's a beautiful thing. Well, Charley, for folks that want to learn more about Gutenberg, we'll certainly put links to the college in there. You've got this article that I've read and highly recommend on teaching the skill of reading and the art of interpretation. Any other resources you would mention?
No, but just as I say, if you want to challenge, pick up the book Personal Knowledge by Michael Polanyi. As I say, I think it's the most important philosophy book written in the 20th century.
Great, good recommendation, and we can put that link in there too. Well, Charley, thank you for coming off the grid a little bit and finding the technology so we can talk. Again, maybe we'll have you back on. I'm still love to hear more of your stories of what you've done in helping to reclaim the salmon population and the important work on the science and the sciences as well. You've got a lot of expertise, and certainly appreciate you making time today.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed being here and chatting with you.
Thank you, Charley.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Basecamp Live. Be sure to check out our website, basecamplive.com, for more than 8 years of timeless episodes that you'll find helpful and encouraging, as well as the helpful resources offered on our partners page. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of our partners like the Herzog Foundation. See you back next week.